In this video, I just want to give a few more comments about how much money to live in Thailand. Like you can say it's a part two video or just some further comments and so forth. And the point that I wanted to make was, and again, these are the massive risks to going to Thailand in the first place. To marry a Thai woman, go to Thailand, it may seem like a dream, but I've got to make a few more points about this. The thing about the money is, I gave you a figure, 6 million, very conservative, 30 years. Now, it all comes down to how much comfort you want and how much money you have. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of men who work their lives and get a big payout, big super payout, and so forth. They might be in their 60s. I talked about 50 as being a rough sort of guide, and I'll talk about that later because I was lucky I was younger. I'll come back to that. I'm making these videos because I know what I'm talking about, and I've actually been there and done that, and I almost got caught up in all these troubles. Well, I did partly, but again, luckily, I can escape it. The main reason is I'm young enough, but I'll mention that in a moment. So, like I said, even if you're in your 60s, 30 years goes to 90. So, depending on, everyone wants to live a long, healthy lifetime. So that's the whole issue of how much money, because if you run out of money, that's the massive risk. Now, the thing is, if you've got a wonderful wife and family and you're looked after, fine. But let's go through a few risks that can occur in Thailand. There are a lot of abandoned men. A lot of old men get abandoned. Now, I'm talking, okay, once you get to your 80s, 90s, and you become nursing home fodder, nursing home material, okay, a lot of men get abandoned. Their younger wife might still be middle-aged, maybe in her 60s, and they just abandon you. There was a recent one where a man was left at a police station in Thailand, some foreign man, in a wheelchair, can't look after himself. That's what can happen. So you can either be abandoned. In those sort of cases, you might be lucky if you sort of die younger. If you just suddenly die. I know this is not nice to talk about, but this is just life. If you do live a really long, healthy life, the chances are you're going to end up as nursing home fodder, a nursing home geriatric. And what's going to happen to you then? A lot of men get abandoned. This is why there's a lot of suicides in Thailand. These older men run out of money. And I've got a video where I talk about this in a previous video about suicides, why it happens and so forth. You run out of money and you're maybe too old to go back to your country to work and you're stuffed. I'll talk about that again. I'll come back to that point. Your family back in your country doesn't want to know you, and that's partly happened to me. As an example, for me, my brother has basically slammed me. He's totally put his foot down because I reached out at one point, and my own brother has sort of told me to get stuffed. Okay, so that's what can happen to you. But again, I'm a winner. I'm lucky that I can keep going. And like in that video for suicides, I estimate that for every suicide, this is just my estimation, there's probably hundreds of bad news stories, bad luck stories, men who have been ripped off, lost their money. Now, to go to the extremes of either jumping off a building or hanging yourself, or both, one guy hanged himself and jumped off a building. I estimate there's hundreds of bad news stories. That's my ratio. A lot of old men end up begging in temples. Old abandoned men in temples begging for food. And that's also why now the Thai authorities have made it mandatory to have health insurance. And that's another cost you have to put onto my previous video. I didn't even talk about health insurance. It's now one more regulation that you have to have health insurance to live in Thailand, because exactly for what I said, there are so many old men abandoned in hospitals, nowhere to go, and they can't even be sent back to their countries. They're just an old man, an old geriatric man in a hospital, abandoned, nursing home material. Or there's suicides, or you end up begging in temples and so forth. There's some of the things that can happen to you. Because what you've got to realise is, what are the chances of you going back to your country? Back to your original, family? Virtually none for a lot of these men. And even me, I'm partly to that point. Understandably, your family might be, I say almost understand, a bit rough, but, they might be negative towards you. Like, you went to Thailand and, it's your problem, and now you want to crawl back and ask for money and all this sort of stuff. And that's the attitude. To me, with my own brother at least, I haven't even reached out to anyone else. I don't give a stuff now in my life. Anyway, and I've heard that from other men as well, that they've tried to sort of reach out to their original country and their family, and they've been given the cold shoulder. Now, if you're too old to go back to your country and work, that's what I want to talk about, because then you're stuffed. You've gone there in your 50s, your 60s, you've lived, had a good time, picked up some bar girl, you run out of money, now you're too old to go back to work. You're stuffed. What are you going to do? That's another major risk of going to Thailand. For me, in previous videos, I talked about how you want to go to Thailand when you're over 50. I went to Thailand when I was 45, realised I was too young, but I don't mean to contradict myself, but in a very lucky way, it was actually lucky I went to Thailand when I was so young, quote young, at 45. And then I was lucky to run out of money, because I ran out of money, I was 48 when I came back to Australia. But I was young enough, quote, to go back to work at least, and I'm back working in a good job. So that's where I'm lucky. I'm a survivor of all these bad news stories. And that's why for you, if you're a Western man thinking about marrying a Thai woman and going to Thailand, these are the warnings I'm giving you. Don't come crying to me. You can go to Thailand, but all I'm saying is you can do what you want, but just don't come crying to me if something bad happens and you end up an abandoned old man, you end up in a suicide, or you want to kill yourself but you can't bring yourself to it. You end up begging in temples, you've got no family to go back to, you're too old to go back and work, all this sort of stuff. Your family doesn't want you back, all these risks if things go sour. If you live happily ever after, fine. If you've got a great wife and a great family, that's okay. But if things go bad, you divorce, you get ripped off, you want to leave, whatever. And again, coming back to me, I was lucky that I was young enough. Imagine if I went to Thailand when I was in my 50s and then I ran out of money. Again, divorce, go to court, lose your money. And I was in my mid-50s or late 50s. What were my chances of coming back to a good job? I'm pushing 60. It would have been minimal, and I would have been in serious trouble. Having said that, I've got a double reason why I'm lucky, because I've still got my superannuation to come when I turn 60. So at least I've got a bundle of money to come. That's where I'm lucky two ways. And that's why I'm making these videos, because I am lucky. I'm actually lucky that I ran out of money so young. I've come back to work. If you're pushing 60 in your 60s, 70s, 80s, you're totally stuffed. And the second way I'm lucky is because I've still got my superannuation to come when I turn 60. So I've still got that. If it wasn't for that money there, my God, I'll be even worse than I am now. But I've got a good job. I've got my super there. So that's why I'm making these videos, because I was lucky. And I'm a survivor and I'm winning, but that's just my circumstances. But many other men, it's a massive risk to go to Thailand. I'm just warning you. It can work out if you really meet a good wife, if you're looked after, but if you run out of money, you can be abandoned. So many men kill themselves. I estimate for every suicide, there are hundreds of bad news stories. That's my ratio. No scientific evidence for that. That's just what I think from the news stories and what I know. You end up begging in temples. Can you go back to your country to work? If you're too old, you're stuffed. Does your family want you back? No, they're going to be negative towards you. You're stuffed. They're all the things that can happen to you. And I'm a survivor of a bad news story in Thailand. And that's why I'm making these videos for you. I was young enough. I turned 49 next month. I came back when I was 48. Come March, it'll be 1 year back in Australia. Back to a good job working. Got my own place here. And I've still got my superannuation to come when I turn 60 or retire. So I'm a lucky survivor that's still going forwards and still can get back on my feet and go up. But for these men, just a few more points I wanted to make about the money situation and the risks about going to Thailand. Probably things I forgot to say. I might do more videos, you make a video and you forget what you want to say, but there it is, just a few more comments. Take care and I'll see you next time.